Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag and drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. This is The Next Reel, everybody. I'm Pete Wright, and that there is Andy Nelson.
Hey, hey, hey.
And we spoil movies. Tonight on the show, Eastwood brings his small-town Arizona lawman mystique to the big bad city that is New York. What hijinks will ensue?
Here comes Clint Eastwood in Coogan's Bluff. Clint Eastwood is...
Coogan.
You from Texas?
Arizona.
And Coogan gives New York 24 hours to get out of town. Clint Eastwood, Arizona Sheriff. Unpredictable, unconventional. Applies the techniques of the modern Western lawman to ride herd on the lawless in the joints and nightclubs of a big city.
This, Andy, is part of our series on crime films of 1968, parentheses, that we have not seen until this point, close parentheses. Is that important for us to add here?
Well, it is. I mean, it's an interesting series. I mean, you know, anyone listening to the show knows that we're currently doing for the rest of the year films that are celebrating their 50th anniversary, films and franchises. And so we specifically picked for this series crime films, and the 4 crime films that we're talking about right now. This was one of the categories that we had all of our Patreon supporters voting on. and narrowed it down to these 4 films, this being one of them. And I think, honestly, I don't know. I'm very curious now, after having seen the film, if any of our Patreon supporters had watched this film before voting on it, or if they were all voting on it based on the fact that it was the first pairing of Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood.
Well, and that, I have to say, is exactly why I wanted to see it, because of their history together, which obviously we'll talk about. I think the film, if it surprised me for any reason, is that it surprised me that it felt emptier of resonance than I expected, given what it was. It seemed sort of predictable in the way it approached vice and the way it approached law and order and morality, and it wore those things pretty much on its sleeve. And so I had a little bit of trouble looking at the context of 1968, what was going on in 1968, and seeing how this this film wasn't just, it didn't feel like kind of an obvious trope machine.
It's interesting because of the, Targets, as we discussed last week, that was a film that Paramount was very nervous about releasing because of some of the things that had been happening in society, namely some of the assassinations like Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. Doing a story about a guy who's, going around with his gun and shooting people from afar, it just felt a little too close to home. But interestingly, this is the film that people said it was too violent and it rang a little rough for audiences at the time. It became controversial. And it makes me wonder if, because of just so much stuff happening in the society going on in the late 60s, that people weren't ready to look at some of the violence as it was depicted on screen, especially in a film that maybe some of it might be portrayed with a little less care. Like this film, it's a little cavalier about its portrayal of violence, because this is really kind of kicking off that whole macho hero thing that Eastwood would carry in so many of his films.
Well, I think that is the perfect word for it, careless. And so much better than mine of, sort of empty of resonance, because it clearly has these things in it. It clearly is trying to make some sort of a statement, but it's doing it in a bit of a haphazard way. And that maybe is part of the reason I feel like this movie doesn't hold up as well today as I felt Targets did.
Yeah, I don't think this film really held up at all. I felt watching it that it was very much a product of its time. It was looking at some of this very specific crime issues of its time as this country mouse goes to the city and encounters hippies and encounters drug trips and all this sort of stuff. It just felt very much of a very specific place that just didn't have that staying power that Targets did.
So let's talk about your experience watching it for the very first time. You say it doesn't hold up. What did you think of the overall narrative of the film?
It felt very standard. I think that you said it pretty well already. It felt like it was playing with these police tropes, and it was pretty expected, everything that happened. Now, thinking back to other police stories, I know we've looked at some films in the past that were kind of like the ones that kickstarted the genre, where it feels like we've seen it a million times, but that's because this is where it all began. I don't know if we can really say that about this particular film. I think that cop films had been going on forever, kind of along with the whole line of noir films and even cop comedy films. I feel like it had been a thing. And if anything, this felt just very standard in the way that everything played out and just expected and not very interesting. And to that end, it really was kind of a disappointment to finally see this. I had seen all of the other collaborations between Siegel and Eastwood, just not this one. And finally watching it, I'm glad that all the later films exist. And so if anything, I'm glad that this is where they kind of connected so they could go to those other films.
Well, I absolutely agree. So glad that this was a first, and that we get better with these two as we go on. The whole sort of cultural clash of values, this whole pure country. I mean, I know you're an Arizona lawman yourself, so I would have thought that you would have a deeper connection with Coogan. And when you go to the big city, it's a tough adjustment for you.
It is all horseback and tumbleweeds out here.
It is. It really is. And so I felt like that was a thing that just always felt predictable to me. That we had these pure country values in Coogan, and every time they ran into a corrupt or an abusive or drug addicted, drug addled, or oversexed city folk, we would get the predictable out. And it felt like most of the movie, after our initial setup, when we discover why Coogan is going to New York, we just got these opportunities to put the fish in an awkward situation and see him try to figure out how to get out of it. And there was never a moment where I was surprised. Case in point, the very first time we see Coogan in the New York City police precinct, a police psychologist is interviewing a thug, and the thug is doing some of the weirdest behavior I think I may have ever seen. It's not, I guess, shocking, but it is just weird. He just reaches out and in the middle of a conversation puts his hand on this woman's breast and just holds it there. And there's some lascivious looks and maybe some comments, and she doesn't do anything.
Yeah, she plays it like the stereotypical doctor would, like, nothing you can do is going to surprise me, so you might as well just stop. That's basically her attitude. Because
it's frustrating, because even psychologists and psychiatrists have boundaries. Right. I have to imagine 1968, wasn't that different in a therapeutic context. And so I don't know. I'm not a therapist. I don't know. But it felt very strange. Of course, Coogan is going to step in. Of course, he's going to smack this guy around. Of course, that's exactly what he ends up doing. And of course, she, the cool therapist, actually blames him for stepping in. It was an incredibly predictable, all but the initial, inciting incident of the scene. It was an incredibly predictable way that it played out. And those kind of moments happened repeatedly throughout the film for me.
That's, I think, for me, one of the biggest flaws of the script is that it just felt so sloppy and lazy with a lot of the choices. Like you have, that's a great example. Another one that drove me nuts is you've got this guy named Pushy who helps Ringerman escape from Coogan right after Coogan first takes him out of the hospital.
Pushy you're talking about Bosley, right?
The guy in the green pants.
Yeah, Bosley from...
what was he Bosley in? Oh, Charlie's Angels.
You're Charlie's Angels, yeah.
Right. When we first see Pushy help Ringerman escape, the only thing that Coogan notices is his clothes, that he's wearing these green pants and a red shirt or something like that. And conveniently enough, we're like a week or more down the road, and when Coogan runs into him again, he's wearing the exact same outfit. Just sloppy. Just like Linny being a patient of Julie's. It's like these are horrible story conveniences. And then going back to Pushy, it's like, what was the point of that story thread? Why was Pushy helping Ringerman? Was there an element to that could have been explored more? Or maybe when Coogan keeps trying these things out and like he blows an undercover cop's cover because he goes and talks to Ringerman's mother, these things like that he keeps trying normally in a story. And maybe I'm just being looking at it through today's eyes, but in a story like this, you would say, okay, so he's trying his stuff and it's not working on their territory. But is he ever going to try their stuff and it's going to work? Or is he going to finally show them that, hey, if he does this thing of his in their territory, it will work. But no, they kind of set this sort of stuff up and nothing gets paid off. It's just there.
I just want some feedback on this, because on that point, I feel like we got a really sort of haphazard answer to Coogan's Bluff. Why this movie is called Coogan's Bluff, which puzzled me until this afternoon as I started kind of piecing together the first act and the last act of the movie. In the beginning of the film, we have this, we have Coogan, and we actually open on this, it looks like a member of the Navajo tribe, and he is running. He's set up a bit of an encampment in a rocky outcropping in a mountain in the middle of the high non-Arizona desert, right?
Yeah.
And he has a gun, and he's eating something. And then we have a Jeep, and in the Jeep is Coogan, and it's dusty and way too dusty for my liking. It made me very uncomfortable. He finds boots, he finds clothes, he pulls them all together, and he ends up doing this little vehicle dance in the sand. He starts doing these donuts to kick up a lot of dust and trick the Navajo member of the Navajo tribe to think that he's in the car, but it turns out he's in all kinds of different places, right? I mean, he's echoing through the rocks, and it turns out he's able to catch the guy, right? And my sense is that is an example of Coogan's bluff, right? He is bluffing. He's not really where you think he is, and he ends up winning the day. Are you with me so far?
I'm with you. All
okay.
right.
The end of the movie, we're looking for our main bad guy, Ringerman, played by Don Stroud, has taken up residence in a castle in the middle of Central Park, I believe. He's in this castle. He's behind these giant bars. Coogan has tricked Linny to take him there, and Coogan lets her run ahead, and she does. Predictably, she runs ahead, and then he kind of sneaks around, and he ends up being not where you think he's going to be. And there's this long sort of protracted chase through the grounds of the castle. They get on motorcycles, they're driving around. But my sense was that was how they wanted Coogan's bluff to pay off from the opening of the film. Look, Coogan is so smart, he can use his wily Arizona police trickery here in New York City, even though none of the New York City cops thinks he merits a place there. What do you think? Is it too much of a stretch?
Now, I'm not
saying
the challenge I have. I mean,
it's not
I
rewarding.
Can see, no, it's not. And I can see your point. I can see what you're going for with that. The challenge I have is that Coogan's Bluff, and I didn't know this until after watching the film, is an actual location in New York. It's an actual a bluff. It is a piece of. It's a lookout point over the ocean on Manhattan Island between Washington Heights and Harlem.
Well, it seems like that should have been something that we know.
Well, exactly. Well, and what is interesting, and I don't fully understand this, is that the film, as we watched it, has had about 3 minutes edited out of it. The scenes include Coogan receiving his assignment to go to return Ringerman from New York, a short scene in a hospital, and a scene in which Julie talks about Coogan's Bluff. Now, apparently, this edited material was in every version of it until the most recent DVDs had come out, and nobody really knows what was the reasons for the cuts. So I don't know. I couldn't find anything about it, but so I can, for us not having the luxury of having seen that footage, your theory is the only valid one that makes any sense, because otherwise it's a nonsense title.
Total nonsense title. And that's very frustrating. Why did they edit this movie, Andy? Why did they cut it? Why did they do that?
I don't know. Nobody knows.
Susan Clark. She makes Coogan's blood boil in more ways than one can imagine. She falls for Coogan's bluff. Don Stroud, dangerous hopped-up killer, who is cornered by Coogan's bluff. Tisha Sterling, the beautiful decoy who calls Coogan's bluff. Betty Field, who unwittingly buys Coogan's bluff. And Lee J. Cobb, the tough police lieutenant who challenges Coogan's bluff.
Get the hell out of my office and don't come back until I send for you.
The movie does, we've been a little bit hard on it so far, and I think that's, I don't know, it's fair, but there are some things I think that are actually interesting, particularly interesting visually. And I'm not necessarily talking about the, cinematography specifically here, but there are some sequences that are really interesting to watch. At one point, Coogan has to go find Lenny at a club, right?
Yeah,
and he goes
hippie drug club.
He goes to the hippie drug club, and then the movie changes tone. It feels almost like somebody else was in charge of it. Certainly, with a more active editing hand, trying to give us the feeling of actually being in the hippie drug club and putting us, I think, for me, reasonably successfully in the head of Coogan as he is trying to make his way across the floor, clearly experiencing something that he's never experienced before. How did this dance or this club sequence hit you?
Again, it felt like film school 101 type of storytelling. They're in a totally different place. Let's make it crazy. And so everything went crazy as soon as he went into the club. The camera work.
So you think I'm being too easy on it right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, look at it this way. It's an older film. It's a 50-year-old film, and we have to acknowledge that at the time, for Don Siegel and his team behind the film, they were trying some things out. And sure, I think to that end, they did, as you say, create a very different mental impression of this club for Coogan than we had seen at any point so far in the film. So I mean, I can see that point. I do get a sense of that. Yeah, sure.
I have to look at it that way because I was really not engaged in much else that was going on screen. I will, however, say that as he gets to the middle of the floor, a woman dressed in only a dragon tail of some sort. She's nude, and the tail is kind of covering her crotch, and she comes swinging down like what do you call the cable?
Like a guy wire sort of thing.
Yeah, she comes swinging down a wire and lands on Coogan. Right, she lands on him, which felt like again weirdly targeted sort of screenwriting trope that she lands on the only Arizonan in the place. But then, and that's the first time I'm thinking about this sequence, thinking, okay, they've created a cool environment. They're doing this crazy cool intercutting thing where we get these flashes of what's going on these giant movie screens. We get flashes of things that I don't think are on the movie screens that I wasn't able to place, kind of cutting through his experience of the facility, and then they put this weird exclamation point on it by putting the naked lady swinging from the sky right in his lap. And I thought that for me was the bridge too far in the sequence. It just made it nonsense and not what I had gone into it with, this sort of spirit of grace, looking at this film saying, I'm looking for something to connect with. It hasn't really given me much so far, but at least I'm visually interested in what I'm seeing right now. And the payoff was not satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, it was, considering how flat and dull the rest of the film looked as far as the cinematography went, it was very standard. Nothing, there was a couple shots that were interesting to me, but and a couple editing tricks that I thought were pretty interesting, but largely it was pretty standard and sometimes boring. And I attribute some of that to its age, but some of it I just feel like, they could have been doing some much more interesting stuff in this. I felt like Peter Bogdanovich was doing some more interesting things in Targets, and considering
I think
this
that's
is like
the most important thing right there, Andy, is that we're comparing movies that were contemporaries of one another. Why is it that Targets was so much more sort of engaging for me than this one was? And they're just months apart.
Yeah. And this is like Don Siegel's 25th film or something like that. I mean, this is a director who had been making projects for a very long time. Right. And certainly knew his way around projects. Now, as we know from stories about Clint Eastwood, he learned a lot of his filmmaking from like Don Siegel, and Eastwood has a very slow pace. He doesn't like doing a lot of takes. He just has a very kind of a careful hand, nothing too crazy as far as he's definitely not Edgar Wright, I guess is basically what I'm saying. Or even Scorsese. He's a very simple way of telling his stories with his camera. And I think Don Siegel is the same. I just think in this particular case that as nice as some of Don Siegel's later films are, I think this one is suffering from a weaker script that just doesn't engage. And I feel that it was not something that was trying to do anything that was exciting or special.
Well, that's disappointing.
It is. It really was. Coogan is from Piute County, Arizona, and there isn't a Piute County in Arizona. There is one in Utah, and I think that it's a funny thing to point out because this is this country deputy sheriff who gets bothered when everybody mistakes him for Texan. Yet
but he's actually from Utah.
Here they are. They can't even get the county right. Now, there used to be a Piute County in Arizona, but that was until 1871 when part of it went to Nevada, and then the rest was named Mojave County, which is still here. But like I said, there is a Piute County in Utah. So.
Let's talk a little bit about Lee J. Cobb, can we, as Sheriff McElroy?
I don't think have we talked about any films with him on our show at any point?
Why is it that I feel like we have?
And I feel like we haven't.
Well, he was Lieutenant Kinderman in The Exorcist.
Oh, that's right. The right with the little Casablanca ending of the film.
Right.
Right. I had forgotten that, yes.
Yeah. We are well experienced Lee J. Cobb aficionados now.
That's all it took.
I quite like Lee J. Cobb. I think he's great, and maybe in another universe, he plays the surly New York lieutenant in a more satisfying way. I don't think he was given a whole lot to work with. He felt much more like sort of a script pawn, kind of moved around from scene to scene to just be surly. And never gave us anything of substance, any real roadblocks that weren't completely just sort of obvious, again, cop tropes.
Well, and that goes again to the story problems. I mean, you've got this sheriff here who tells Coogan, you're off the case. Your boss wants you back. And but just kind of doesn't really do anything about it, and I don't know. It just was kind of felt disappointing to have them working the way that they did. I wanted to see a stronger relationship develop between these guys because I really like him as an actor, and I thought his character had some potential. And if they found a way to really develop that between the two of them, it could have been nice.
Yeah, I agree, and it was sad. It was sad when you see him on screen and realize that you're not getting what he's capable of, even at this point. In his career, it was at the point where everything he's in should have been awesome,
right?
And it just did not pay off that well. How about the hippie, our friend the hippie, Tisha Sterling, as Lenny Raven?
I struggled with that character and Coogan's relationship with her, largely because when we meet her, it is at the hospital with when Coogan goes to pick up Ringerman from the hospital, and she's proven right away to be a criminal and certainly helps Ringerman escape along with Pushy, yet is never treated as such. I would assume that if that had actually happened, that she would be looking at as a suspect and suspiciously, and they would want to arrest her. But of course, instead, Coogan just wants to track her down so that he can sleep with her, I guess, and get her to help him.
I don't know. I've been trying to find a good comparison of her and what her character is meant to do in the script. When you think of her, can you think of anybody who serves the same role in a different movie that actually gives us that same kind of Janus complex, a little bit schizophrenic, maybe, completely not trustworthy, that isn't like, the Joker, kind of Harley Quinn. It isn't a comic book villain, because that's kind of what I get with her. That's the experience that I have watching her, that I never really felt like I could trust anything that came out of her, and that never resolved for me. She never became a character of any sort of redemption. So I couldn't quite figure out what I was supposed to do with her in the context of the film. I already have an antagonist that I haven't spent a whole lot of time with. And I just didn't understand what to do with her.
Yeah. And the fact that she had this connection with Julie, which seemed incredibly forced to have that situation tied into this whole thing.
Yeah, Julie, who's her therapist. Again, that was very strange. And on Julie, it felt like we have Julie in this movie just to give her the opportunity to be betrayed in her own office by Coogan. This gets to a challenge I have with Coogan, that if he's showing up in New York to demonstrate what it means to be a beacon of morality, he does a terrible job doing that throughout this film.
Oh, yeah. And that was a big thing I had right from the beginning, because we see him getting very, his feathers ruffled when he sees this criminal, fantastically played by Seymour Cassell, who's the boob grabber, kind of, taking advantage of her. And so he decks him and offends her and all this sort of stuff. But then later he is just as pushy with her. And I'm like, this is that James Bond, complex where it's okay for the hero to beat up the villain when they do something like that, but it's okay for them to do it themselves.
Right.
Because they're our hero. And it's very nonsensical, and I mean, unfortunately, it's how a lot of these sorts of action films are. When the cop gets the girl, right? They can be a little pushy, and but they're gonna love it anyway. And it was just kind of frustrating to see, and I never felt like it was a relationship that was developed properly, and it just almost like it I don't know what the right term is, but it's like my jaw dropped out of just kind of shock and screenwriter disappointment to see her at the end running out in her outfit. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh God, really? Is this where we're going to end with her? It completely diminished her as any respectable character.
Well, it was super cheap, cheaply written, and that same vibe of just cheaply written women. We start the movie that way right after our initial, catch, when Coogan gets back to his, desert cabin. We have this weird experience where he walks into the cabin. You're not quite sure, is this his? Is this the guy that he just caught? Like, what's he doing nosing around this cabin? He walks in kind of skulking around, and he looks in the bedroom, and there's a beautiful woman lying in the bed, and he walks over to her, and while she's still sleeping, he's like leering at her. He is the kind of gross,
totally creepy. Yeah.
Total creep, standing in the doorway, and then goes up and starts kissing her while she's asleep. She wakes up, and it turns out she's, clearly knows him. And the payoff is, oh, isn't that funny? He was being a creep, but it turns out they're in a relationship. Then he leaves town and proceeds to try to sleep with everybody.
Well, and when you say relationship, she's married. her husband's out of town.
Yes.
And so that's their relationship.
Right. Right. Not to put too fine a point on the morality of Coogan in this film. You're absolutely right. The comparison to James Bond is great. Just James Bond. I mean, I'm not thrilled with the aesthetic of James Bond these days either, but at least he does it better.
Yeah, it doesn't come across very well here. And I do have to say, it's even more disappointing with Julie, played by Susan Clark, just because I grew up watching Webster, and seeing her in that show in my youth was so fantastic. And to see her character kind of in this role, it was a little disappointing.
Oh, wow. I had forgotten that.
Yeah, she's the mom.
I'm suddenly sort of heartbroken. Oh, dear.
Well, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
It's an interesting, the backstory for this movie is kind of interesting because we had talked about the Man with No Name trilogy, and he had been a busy actor in Hollywood, just like Don Siegel had been a busy director in Hollywood. But Clint was always kind of just a bit player in all the projects that he was in. He didn't do anything big until he went over to Europe and did the Man with No Name trilogy, and that kind of made a name for him. And so when he came back and got onto Rawhide, and he finally was like the star of movies after that point. And so he did Hang 'em High, the Western, which came out actually the same year as this, and this. So that was kind of we're right at the beginning of his U.S. Film run. And it's kind of interesting to look at where he goes from here, but it is kind of a pain that he has to start with something like this, which is frustrating. But it actually started as a TV series idea, which I thought was interesting. And I think the idea that Herman Miller and Jack Laird, they were some screenwriters from Rawhide, they really were going for this country mouse, city mouse sort of vibe. It was this lonely deputy sheriff, Sheriff Walt Coogan, who went to New York City to work. And it had this vibe that I think may have been a better vibe. And then I know that Siegel and Eastwood, when they came on board, they had a bunch of different people writing it. And after like 7 drafts, Eastwood said he just didn't like the direction it was going. He preferred that original concept. And so they brought him back and hired Dean Reesner on to work on it. And that's the script that we ended up getting here. He had worked with Don Siegel in the past. And I know that he had some issues with Eastwood, but was able to kind of work things out so that they could find a script that people would be satisfied with. But even then, I still think finding a better way to do the country mouse, city mouse story, I think they could have done so much better. I mean, we've talked about another great film that is so much better than this one that is very similar, and that's Clute. I think that's another example that is just shows what it should have been.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And even still, this film, you say, was controversial for its portrayal of violence?
Yeah.
It doesn't, this film doesn't strike me as a particularly crassly violent movie. What did I miss?
Yeah, and I was wondering about that because I think what it is, it's just the way that anything violent happened. There didn't seem to be cause for it, like when Eastwood punches that guy out who's fondling the doctor, or I guess the fight in the bar and how people get laid out and they're just kind of laying there and bloodied up and stuff. And I guess that's the sense that I'm getting, is that's what they were thinking was too violent. I mean, it certainly isn't Targets, but again,
well, I was just going to say
that one had its
I
own.
recognize you and I are deeply desensitized in this area, but Targets was legitimately.
But you have to remember, this one is controversial maybe because it had a big release. This is the one that got a big release and was pushed into theaters. Targets, they were so scared about releasing it that it hardly had a release. So it didn't have anything out there to be controversial because there wasn't any talk about it.
That's interesting. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Before we move on to some of the other folks in the crew, we haven't talked much about Don Stroud as James Ringerman. He was, he was a weirdo bad guy.
He's a guy that seems like somebody who's on an LSD trip. I guess that's what they were going for. This is what did they say? He's experiencing residual LSD after effects or something like that.
Yes.
And that's why he's bad. This was like the perfect era for making films like this for mass audiences to say, this is what LSD does. Don't use it. Turns you into a criminal. And then you run around, horrifying people for weeks.
Well, and, it gives us an opportunity to see a ridiculous stereotype of an asylum that, ends up being closer to a dormitory than it was like a circus. And I felt like, what are we, was this where the movie was supposed to be funny? One of the things you said last week as we wrapped up was that, this was billed as an action comedy. I didn't get a lot of that comedy, but I thought if there was any, maybe it would be here.
Yeah, I was trying to figure that out too, because IMDb calls it an action crime comedy. So I was struggling through that. Is it because of little moments like him and the woman? Like, is it just 50-year-old comedy that we're not getting anymore? Or were there some genuine funny moments? I don't know. I didn't feel like there was really anything genuinely funny. I felt like if there's anything that's funny, it's dated now and not that funny.
As the bad guy, it was good to see him. He's very strange. He's done a lot of stuff. 163 credits, and this film was early in his run.
Yeah, he's done tons of stuff. One of the most recent projects that he was in was Django Unchained. He was
That's right.
Bill Sharp in that. So yeah, he's an interesting one. The other person that I wanted to point out was Betty Field, who played his mother. She was an actress from the early days of film back in the late 30s. She started and she kept pretty busy all the way up into the 60s. But this was her last film. She did a couple TV things after this and died in 1973 at the age of 57. So
what a way to go out!
Yeah. Yay. I will say, I actually loved her character and the scene between her and Coogan when he comes over to her place. I was like, this is energy. This is what the film needs. This was New York versus the country mouse. And I really enjoyed everything going on in that moment.
That is a terrific point. And I think it gets right to, as you say, that energy. And it felt much more like a staged event, like a stage play to me, where you actually, in terms of her performance, you actually get a sense of craft that I think is missing in, a lot of the movie. So I think you're absolutely right. I don't mean to minimize that quite so aggressively. She was terrific.
Yeah.
Camera with Bud Thackeray, uncredited Robert Surtees. We've already mentioned camera a little bit, and editing by Sam Waxman. There's again, it seems very straightforward production until it's not.
We already talked about the craziness of the party scene and how they decided to go all out there. But there were a few other moments here and there that were just strange to me, the way that they were kind of cut in. Right after Coogan arrives in New York City, he gets off the Pan Am helicopter and goes out into a taxi. And you get this really strange, not quite bird's eye shot that after he gets in the cab, it's this shot looking at a playground of all places. And then it tilts up to the traffic and all the taxis. And I had to go back a couple times and freeze frame it. Like, what am I looking at? And why am I staring at this all of a sudden? It was a very strange thing. And I really wasn't sure what Siegel was trying to say with that shot. Did you notice it?
I did, and I didn't go back and watch it again, but you're absolutely right. It's a bizarre little way to give us a sense of perspective of the city. Maybe that there is a sense that we're upside down, like this is an upside down experience. Maybe we're wearing that on our sleeve, the fish out of water experience. Like the whole world is going to be upside down for our protagonist here.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it's like, this is the crazy city, but there are still children here too, and trying to get a sense of, this scope of what the city is. I don't know.
That's never a great argument, because the next shot we get is just nutso people in a police station. Look at who these crazy children grow up to be.
Right.
The world is lost. Our souls are crushed.
Right, exactly. But there were some interesting things. I already talked about the scene that I liked with Betty, but also just as far as editing in the bike chase, which largely I felt was pretty standard and uninteresting, except that you could see that it was actually Eastwood and Stroud riding the bikes. I liked that we got that element. But there was this really interesting cut that I actually was excited by, where we're chasing, where the cameraman is behind the bike as it's riding away from us, and then it's like a match cut on the bike, and we're now leading the bike, and it's coming toward us. And it was like this really interesting jump cut, or a match cut that kind of flipped from front to back, just suddenly in the middle of the bike chase. I was like, oh, wow, that was a really interesting thing to throw in there. So that was something that I enjoyed quite a bit.
There's some funny little cuts in that. And I agree with you. I think it was cool that it was clearly both these guys in for the most part riding these bikes. There are some really interesting scenes. First of all, I never got the feeling that Don Stroud had a problem riding a motorcycle. I had less confidence in Clint Eastwood. Did you notice he was always just looked a little shaky as he was trying to get around corners and such? And then there's a cut where they are taking the bikes upstairs, and Stroud gets to the top of the stairs. I'm pretty sure it was Stroud. It might have been Eastwood in this case. But he gets to the top of the stairs and loses his balance a little bit, and you see the bike careen the front suspension, like the front fork, into the brickwork of a wall around this castle or in the Central Park or something. And it cuts immediately at that collision. And I can't help wondering what happened next. Where did the bike go after that? Because physics was at work here. And I think the magic of film prevents us from seeing physics when it could have been at its best.
It would have been so much better.
Lalo Schifrin did the music.
Yeah, he's a composer that's done a lot of good stuff. I think the music here worked. I would say that I enjoyed it. I don't think I loved it, but I felt at least it had some themes that worked.
I actually think very highly of Lalo Schifrin. I deeply enjoy his later work. We have been seeing a lot of him lately with hearing his work in Mission Impossible. It's very cool to see his stuff continue to kind of play on over the years. So.
And this is the same year he did Bullet, so busy year.
He's responsible for some amazing themes that have been around for decades and decades, and so very cool. And in fact, he was behind the series composer for Planet of the Apes, so kind of fun for the TV series. So anyhow,
absolutely,
a lot of history with Lalo Schifrin. So there we go.
So we're getting close to wrapping it up. One last thing about Coogan's Bluff that I thought was fairly interesting, unrelated to the film, but there is the curse of Coogan's Bluff, which was a baseball-related superstition that allegedly prevented the San Francisco Giants Major League Baseball franchise from winning the World Series when they moved from New York to San Francisco at the end of the 1957 season. It was a curse that began when some upset Giants fans who were in New York apparently placed a hex on the relocated team, and the curse finally ended when the Giants won the 2010 World Series, and since they had moved to San Francisco. So that's apparently the end of Coogan's Bluff, or the end of the curse of Coogan's Bluff. But again, I don't think it necessarily relates to the film, but we'll never know because it's in that missing footage when she talks about Coogan's Bluff.
That 3 minutes, right. Yeah. Look for the 3 minutes. It turns out this does have a spiritual sequel.
It really does, yeah. The TV series McCloud, which Dennis Weaver starred in, was loosely adapted from this. Interestingly, just like I think Don Siegel's previous film also turned into a TV series. I'm trying to remember what it was called. His TV series was Madigan. Yeah, Madigan was the movie, and it was turned into a TV series as well. So there you go.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, Andy, how did it do in the box office?
Siegel got busy making his film with a budget of $1.5 million, which is about $10.4 million in today's dollars. The movie was released October 2nd, 1968, opposite Night of the Living Dead, which we'll be talking about soon enough. Coogan's Bluff proved popular, despite apparently the controversy about the violence, bringing in $3.1 million or $21.5 million in today's dollars to the studio, giving it an adjusted profit per finished minute of about $120,000. This bode well for Siegel and Eastwood, who would continue their relationship in 4 more films over the next decade.
4 better films. Actually, I've only seen 3 of them, but of those, they're better.
They are all better than this one.
Good to know. Good to know. Important safety tip. I think it's probably time, Andy, for us to rank it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel. You'll see every film we have talked about on this very show. Or you can just swipe over in your show notes, tap on the word Flickchart, and that'll take you directly to this movie where you can add it to your catalog and see how it stands up in ours.
First up, we have Coogan's Bluff, or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Noomi version.
That's going to be the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah, Dragon Tattoo from me. Coogan's Bluff or Atlantic City? I will go with Atlantic City.
Yeah, Atlantic City.
Coogan's Bluff or Near Dark? I'll still take Near Dark.
Yeah, I would take Near Dark.
Coogan's Bluff for 2010.
2010. Yeah.
Give me dolphins in the swimming pool.
This is delightful.
Coogan's Bluff or Apt Pupil. I'm going to go with Apt Pupil.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Coogan's Bluff or Under the Cherry Moon. I'm going to go with Coogan's Bluff.
No. Oh, come on. Well, we're going to the mat, of course.
Of course we are. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Scissors. Paper.
Scissors. Okay.
What are you going to do?
All right. Coogan's Bluff or Children of the Corn? Children of the Corn for me.
Children of the Corn. That was not a great movie, though.
No, it wasn't. We're in that section of not great movies on our chart. Coogan's Bluff, and I guess we should clarify, Coogan's Bluff is not a great movie.
Right.
Coogan's Bluff or Scoop?
Scoop. I'm all in. I'll all in Scoop. On Scoop. Yes.
Coogan's Bluff or Rush? I will take Rush. Andy, there's drama when you have to put a hot iron on your arm. That was serious trauma.
I hate being put in this position because Rush has a lot of weight behind it as being a very, very bad movie. I will absolutely put Rush on first. I'm going to pick Coogan's Bluff. Oh, you're a terrible person. Here we go. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Rock. Scissors. All right. As it should be. Oh, that's redemptive. So. Well, it's 1 spot higher than Rush. It's 364 on our chart out of 370. Oh, so it's dear. Pretty close to the bottom. Yeah. It's a tough one. That was a tough one. So what does this mean for your Letterboxd ranking? How many stars are you going to give this over at letterboxd.com/thenextreel? I was deliberating on this one because I really didn't like it. I feel like there's some merit just in just moments, and Eastwood is easy to watch. It's not a hard film to watch. It's not painful or anything like that. It's not very well told, unfortunately. So I'm still giving it 1 star, but no likes. I got ahead of myself. What does this mean for your personal ranking on Flickchart? I couldn't tell you. It's so far down there. There aren't numbers. I know. I haven't ranked it. Oh. Okay, noted. All right, good. Well, this ended up at 909 on my list out of 1,038 movies, and according to the algorithm, I should give this a half star, a glorious half star over on Letterboxd. I'm going to give it a 1 star too, but for the very same reasons. I thought Eastwood ended up being cheekier than he had to. I liked him I liked him in those other movies when he talked less, and I don't think this movie satisfyingly portrays the grit of the late 60s, early 70s in a way that says anything unique or special. And that's, it's sad, but luckily we have 2 more to see if we can cleanse our palates. Where do we go from here?
Well, we are going to be just going a hop, skip, and a jump over to Gordon Douglas's film The Detective with Frank Sinatra, based on Roderick Thorpe's novel. This is kind of the... I don't think it's in any way related to the Die Hard story, but it's the same character, right?
Yeah,
in the novels.
That's right. That's my understanding. So that'll be great. That'll be interesting.
I'm looking forward to this one. I think it will be an interesting addition to this series. So we'll chat about it next week. And if you want to hear more of us, but you can't wait until next week's show, you can support us over on patreon.com/thenextreel and get access to our exclusive members-only weekend show, The Saturday Matinee.
We talk about movie news and new trailers. Plus, we go head-to-head in our weekly challenge in which we put together lists of movies related in some way to the movie we're discussing that week on this show.
There are all sorts of other goodies, too, if you support us at different levels. Just head on over to patreon.com/thenextreel.
You can learn more about us and check out the detailed show notes at thenextreel.com.
You can subscribe for free in your favorite podcast app and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at The Next Reel.
And if you want to get into the conversation yourself, join our Discord channel for a whole lot of movie chat with movie lovers from around the world. You can find the link to join in the show notes or over on the website.
The Next Reel couldn't happen without the hard work of Steven Smart running Instagram,
Ben Lott running all things Twitter,
and of course thanks to Eli Catlin, who graciously allows us to use his song Ragtime Instrumental as the theme to the show. You can find out more about Eli on his SoundCloud page.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Amazon giveth, Andy.
As Amazon always doeth.
Now, Amazon did not giveth in a way that satisfies me based on how we felt about this movie. There are only 2 1-star reviews on Amazon.com of this movie. It's stunning.
It is sad.
It's stunning.
A lot of people really like this one, Pete. I'm looking at the 5 stars right now. There are a lot of them.
There are a lot of them. Why are there so many 5-star reviews of this movie? I don't understand it. We are, in spite of what they actually say, we are going to do, I think, both of these 1-star reviews.
I think we should.
We've scraped the bottom of the barrel. I
feel like we should do the 5 stars because we both rated it so low. But I think, let's just do the 1 stars. Let's just stick with it.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and start with David E. Carlson, who says 1 star. And he writes, lousy movie, which I am actually taking a moment to mark as helpful on Amazon.com. Right now, I have marked that as helpful. You?
Well, I've got Jay Michael, who watched this on VHS back in 2006. And he says, yawn. Clint Eastwood is always fun to watch and always has some great lines, but this was just a weak and pathetic movie.
Well, Shala Art writes as in response to that, boo, just kidding. This is my favorite. I also love him as Dirty Harry. Coogan is no Dirty Harry, Shala Art. No Dirty Harry. I am marking this review as helpful also. Thanks, Amazon. It is hard to believe that we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
So many great movies, so many great conversations. But it's a lot of work. Producing this show week after week does require a lot behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We had some great films in Season 8 that started their lives as books or plays, and you can find all of them on our originals page at thenextreel.com/originals.
That's the site where listeners can find links to purchase all the source material behind the adapted films we covered, from Season 1 up through our current season.
For part of Season 8, we had a series celebrating the 50th anniversary of films from 1968.
We talked about 2001 and 2010 for our Odyssey series, both adapted from Arthur C. Clarke's novels. Man, the second one was so much better than the first, right?
Don't you even get me started. Need I bring up Under the Cherry Moon again?
Yes, also so much better.
Wait, no, that's not what I...
Planet of the Apes kicked off its series based on the novel by Pierre Boulet.
We covered Danger Diabolic and The Detective, adapted from novels for our 1968 crime films.
Wait, wasn't that The Detective, the prequel to Die Hard?
They were both written by Roderick Thorpe, and yes, it's the same character in the books.
I can't believe they even asked Sinatra if he'd be in Die Hard. That would have been weird.
Once Upon a Time in America was part of our Leone Once Upon a Time trilogy, adapted from Harry Gray's novel.
And we looked at 1968 Best Picture nominees The Lion in Winter, Rachel, Romeo and Juliet, and Oliver!
We also had an Ingrid Bergman series with adaptations like Spellbound, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Murder on the Orient Express, and Gaslight.
We haven't talked about Gaslight.
Stop gaslighting me!
Dive deeper into these books and more adapted films at thenextreel.com/originals. Every purchase supports the podcast.
Get the full list of adaptations that we've covered on all the Next Reel family of podcasts and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.